Hello, my name is Justin Whitcomb. I am going to be speaking on The Dead today by James Joyce. This was the text I chose to process through. Modernism very much stood out to me throughout the semester, and James Joyce has always been a name that has kind of captivated my attention just due to other classes that I've had where he's been mentioned. So this just seemed like a very fitting piece to read and analyze. I would like to start off by talking about the life of James Joyce. Um, James was born in Dublin, Ireland on February 2nd, 1882. He was the son of John Joyce and Mary Murray. In his formative years, he lived in a predominantly successful um, neighborhood. As time went on throughout his adolescence, he moved into lower class neighborhoods as his father made poor financial choices. However, with that being said, ultimately we see Joyce graduate from Belvedere College, and upon graduation, he began to attend University College Dublin in 1898. Following that time, in 1902, Joyce decides to leave Dublin and move to Paris in order to pursue further studies. Now, he originally pursued medical studies. Ultimately, this resulted in him pursuing literature and artistic studies in his time in Paris. Now, he does in 1903 return to Dublin after receiving a telegram from his father stating that his mother is sick and dying. So he comes back to see her. In that time that he was back, he did meet Nora Barnacle, who did become his partner in 1904. I use the word partner because they did cohabitate for 27 years. In that time, having children, and then ultimately marrying in 1931. Now, in addition to that, he does move with Nora to mainland Europe, living in Austria and Italy. Subsequently, in 1915, when Italy entered World War One, though, Joyce moved his family to Zurich, Switzerland, which was a neutral country. Once the war was over, though, he lived there for 5 years. He decided to move his family to Paris, but World War II ended up breaking out, and at that point, he moved his family back in 1940 to Zurich. Now, Zurich is where he did spend the remaining days of his life. Ultimately, he did die from complications of surgery to an ulcer that he had in January of 1941. Now, to kind of give some context to the Dead is part of Joyce's famous collection known as Dubliners. Joyce really focused on themes such as Irish nationalism, religion, music. These types of things were really predominant within his work. We do see this story open at the time of a dinner party. Uh, the dinner party is believed to essentially be a celebration of the Catholic holiday of Epiphany. And this is where we meet our main characters, Gabriel Conroy and his wife Greta, as well as Gabriel's aunts Kate and Julia. Now, when we first meet them, they actually tease him quite a bit for his galoshes that he wears, and this is kind of the dynamic we first see between some of these main characters. Now, additionally, Gabriel does have a very awkward interaction with the caretaker's daughter, Lily. She is asked by Gabriel about her love life, and her response embarrasses him. Essentially, he ends up deflecting, stating that he has a difficulty being able to connect with the lower class due to his superior education, just the standard defense mechanism, a very proud man trying to run away from his insecurities. So as we move further into the story here, we start to see these characters begin to engage in the party. Um, there's the arrival of essentially the town drunk, Freddie Malins, as uh, Gabriel's aunt states that he needs to go check on him before he comes into the party to make sure he isn't screwed, as she is sure he is probably screwed. He goes ahead and takes this older gentleman with him, Mr. Brown, to kind of redirect Freddie, make sure that he's okay to be around the decent folk, and make sure that he is sober. Um, as we continue through, though, the party is in full swing at this point, and there's dancing, there's music, and the music is actually being played by our third hostess, Miss Mary Jane. And at this point, we see Gabriel get paired up with Miss Ivers, who also teaches at the university. Now, Miss Ivers has a little bit more of a liberal mindset. She focuses more on the nationalism of the Irish nationalism and actually being a part of the culture. She challenges Gabriel in many ways because one, he writes for a conservative newspaper. She actually challenges him and says that he is a West Briton, which would the equivalent of that in that day would just be stating that he was loyal to the reigning British Empire at that time, and meant to be kind of a jab at him as an Irishman. Additionally, she goes further into stating that he should come on vacation uh, to the countryside. He then deflects and says that he is going to be vacationing in Belgium, and she asks, why don't you um, discover your own land that you don't even know? Um, he speaks that he wants to know the languages better of these other countries, and then she challenges him further, stating that he doesn't know the language of their country. Ultimately, he just deflects again and states that this is due to him just being sick of Ireland. Um, Now, as we're getting to dinner, Miss Ivers leaves. We see some of the guests a little bit dismayed by this. However, Gabriel is pretty excited that this person who's been challenging him in his beliefs, these ideas that he holds as concrete, is leaving, and he is essentially the main person at this dinner. He is giving a speech. He's carving the goose. He's doing all of this. So he is pretty excited that she's leaving. Now, as dinner is going, um, he gives this big speech in regards to Irish hospitality, embodied by his aunts, essentially now speaking good of some elements of Irish culture, but how that they are kind of fleeting at this point with the new generation. However, to though not hold on to the past, but move into the present. So as the speech goes on, he gets a roaring applause from the table. Uh, and then once dinner is over, we see guests getting ready to leave. This is where Gabriel gives a good little story about his grandfather and his grandfather's horse. Only for this little funny story to be interrupted by the singing of Mr. Bartel D'Arcy, who is singing this song that spurs this great deep emotion within Greta, Gabriel's wife. Um, as they're proceeding to leave and get into the cab to go back to the hotel they're staying in, Gabriel is picking up heavily on this emotional distraughtness that she's going through, and he wants to master this. He wants to again be in control over her, and this is just a very underlying theme of this man. As they get to the hotel, though, they get into the room, and Greta breaks down and reveals that the song that was being sung earlier reminded her of a past relationship. Um, as she kind of dives into it. She explains about Michael Fury, this young man who died at the age of 17, who had this great, passionate, uh, passionate love that he had for her, that he was willing to stand out and die to see her. And you can see that Gabriel realizes that this is something that he has never experienced, and she falls into a sleep, and he stares at her, realizing that this isn't the same woman that Michael Fury stood out and risked his life to see, and he realizes that he has never loved anyone this way, and this causes a epiphany and this realization in his life, and the story kind of ends on this note of openness of does he end up changing really, or does he just dwell in the inevitability of death and what that brings? Um, and then to go into the effects of the dead and Dubliners, the texts I used for putting together this presentation, I utilized a couple of resources from Bloom's literature database within the Ham Library, as well as our textbook. Gave a lot of great insight, not only historically but also contextually as well. But then I also used a national website that I ended up really getting this last part from. The main focus for Joyce was to write a chapter about the moral history of this country. Really, this was to speak to this paralysis that it seemed that Ireland was in. However, thankfully, we do see that Ireland um, breaks through and gets their independence. So, really, that um, is kind of to me, historically, the effect of his work, and then seeing the actual jump for the nation into independence. So that will conclude my presentation.